Hello, and welcome to The Storyteller's Mission with Zena Dello, a podcast for artists and storytellers about changing the world for the better through story. Today, I am delighted that we have a special guest with us. This is a gal that I have known for 20 some years here in Hollywood. We sort of grew up in the ranks together. We went through the same training program. We've known each other since we both first got started. And I think the world of this gal. Her name is Jennifer Dornbush. She's got a book out. She's got a whole bunch of resources for this community, all of the things you need to be able to reach out to her are in the notes section. And I want you to take advantage of it. I'll get back to you on that towards the end of the show. But in the meantime, what you need to know is she has some incredible things to share with this community. And I am so honored to have her on the show. So, Jennifer, yay! Thank you for coming on.
Scene. It's like old times.
Right? Good times, good times.
Yes.
So, Jennifer, my feeling about you is that you are sort of an expert when it comes to the area of forensics because of your father and because of your history and that. Could you just kind of talk to us about, first of all, why you're so into forensics? And then also, number two, how that's important for storytellers?
Absolutely. So I am an author, a screenwriter, a speaker, and a forensic specialist. And I came by that through birth. So I was born into the forensic world. My father was a medical examiner in Michigan for 3 counties, a pretty big area. And the office of medical examiner was in our house. So literally everything came home. Sometimes the bodies, but just to clarify right off the top, those usually went to the hospital for autopsy. But everything else regarding a medical examiner's office, all the little forensic details, tissue samples, organ samples, video, photographs, files. My dad had a microscope. He was also a forensic pathologist, so he had a microscope in his office. He could look at the slides of tissue right in our house. So I grew up with all of this just around me. My mom was our office manager, so she was part of the business too. And then as my sisters and I grew up, we sort of took on little tasks as asked or needed, like, for instance, just maybe rinsing out a body bag on the front lawn with a garden hose, as one does. So
As one does.
I'm sure you've seen that a million times.
Yeah.
And down the street, he would transport, the bodies in our family Suburban. So there were always, supplies under the seat because he had to be, go at a minute's notice. So yeah, so along the way, I learned a lot about forensic investigation, just kind of without trying really. And also thought it was kind of weird at that time. Like I was a little bit embarrassed because this is before there were like 1,000 CSIs. That made it really cool. It didn't feel very cool at the time. It felt very weird. Anyways, and then to make a long story longer, so I grew up with this for a couple decades. And then when I launched into finally taking my writing seriously, which is when I met you and went through our training together, that was really my first foray into actually learning how to tell a story. And it was actually you and Barbara who we remember we had to do all the pitching, like we had to come up with story ideas and things like that. And I had never really thought about what kind of stories I wanted to tell. I was so green at this. My background had been in journalism and public relations. So I was used to telling, nonfiction, factual kinds of stories. So to sit down and think about, like, well, what kind of story do I want to tell? And I started to generate all these ideas, and a lot of them kind of had this mystery element or this crime element to them. And I think it really was, I know it really was you guys saying, that one right there, that story about the coroner's daughter, that one's really interesting. Like you should work on that one.
Mm.
And so that was really the first time I connected all of my background to my professional life or my emerging professional life. And then the tag to that is as I continue to learn and become a storyteller and understand Hollywood, and understand how competitive Hollywood is, or any writing field for that matter, I was coached a lot by people who were saying, it's not enough to be a great writer.
Mm.
There are thousands of great writers in this town. What makes you different? And again, it took me a minute, and it took some other people kind of pointing out the fact that, like, hey, you seem to know a lot about this, like, forensic world. And I was like, yeah, I guess, yeah, I guess I do. I just kind of assumed everybody knew. And from that, I decided to really kind of take that and run with it, and went to get more training in forensics at the Los Angeles Forensic Science Academy, and really just kind of dive in to that world in a very academic way because I really loved it. I knew I wasn't going to actually work in that world.
That's an interesting thing. You did
Yeah.
it specifically for your writing, but you
Yep.
actually could technically, you're trained to be
Right.
able to be a medical examiner or something.
Well, maybe not a medical examiner, but maybe like a CSI or a fingerprint specialist, or I could get in on kind of some of those entry level, because as we will learn, there's a difference between a coroner and a medical examiner.
Ah,
So a medical examiner is a medical doctor, has
I
to have a
see.
medical degree. I guess we could be coroners because they don't have to have. So, anyways, long story, but that's really how. So I just wanted to take it to another level. I'm so grateful I did, because it not only gave me a really deeper background in forensics, and so now I understand things like DNA, like I understand the science of it. I understand the science of fingerprinting. Can look at a fingerprint and tell you how many loops and whirls and ridges and blah, blah, blah. But it also introduced me to so many people in that world
Hmm.
that I now rely on for my own resources. And so, anyway, had
That's
lots of benefits.
amazing. So, here's the thing. I'm assuming some of you that are listening might feel like, well, this is an episode if you're writing this kind of a story. But that's actually not exactly true. I mean, it is true that this can be
Mhm.
helpful if you're writing sort of mysteries and murder type stuff, thrillers, that sort of thing,
Mhm.
because Jennifer's going to talk about evidence and how you find that and how you use the right terms and blah, blah, blah. But the truth is, and I'm sure you've seen this too, Jennifer, one of my pet peeves is when people will, because every story is about setups and payoffs.
Mhm.
Every story, you start by setting things up. You drop clues early on that then come to full fruition by the end. And unfortunately, a lot of people, a lot of writers, they don't do it either specifically enough, is too general, vague. There's nothing you can sink your teeth into when you're talking
Mhm.
about like evidence. There's always evidence in every story. The
Mhm.
evidence is the setup, it's proof, it's justification for what then happens in the story. And so many people fail to do that well. And then, two, so many people fail to actually, well, I sort of just said this, but it's a little different, to actually get into the nitty gritty of it.
Mhm.
Because we have a tendency to think that if we keep things general, it'll apply to more things. And it's actually just the opposite. The more specific, the more detailed, the more intentional you can be about describing that thing to a T, and it's actually perfect for the story, the more people can take application then with it, and it can,
Mhm.
relate to the story. But unless we do that specific thing, the general stuff just feels really, really weak.
Mhm. And not only that, you're so right, and not only that, but that's where your voice comes in. Your personality and your voice, what makes your story or your script different, or might rise to the top of the slush pile, because there's a detection of like authenticity. Like, oh, this
Mm.
person really lived this. And even if you didn't, for sure you researched it enough that you felt like you lived it. So
Exactly right,
it has
right?
it has a huge weight into how the voice or tone of the piece comes off.
The
So
credibility. So, and I
Mhm.
often, I hate that saying, write what you know,
Right.
because for one, we would never be writing any fantasy if we only wrote what we know. But here's the thing, I would say it's actually true in this. You have to research, By the time, even if you're writing something you have no clue about, or even if you're making up a world, by the time you write about it, you better know it.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
have to know it, because if you don't know it, it just won't work.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And it doesn't take that much. You don't have to become an expert. You don't even, I mean, you don't have to go to Forensic Science Academy to do
Well, that's a really good segue, actually, because a lot of people, and myself included, I'm like, well, I'm never going to go to Forensic Academy, that
Right.
sort of thing. So, how can you help me as a writer be better utilizing the stuff that you've learned in my stories? What do I need to know?
Mhm. So, first of all, I have a whole class on crime story types. You'll be surprised at how many stories are actually crime stories. Like you said, there's plot tracing, there's evidence tracing, there's setups, there's payoffs. In fact, I'm going to just show you this right here, this poster behind me,
Huh?
is Raising Arizona. There we go, which is one of my top
Mm.
5 favorite movies in the world. That's a crime story.
Yeah.
It's a comedy. It's a crime story. If you follow their babies are kidnapped. They must find the kidnappers. The end. That's the plot.
Hmm.
That's a crime story. It's kidnapping. So, but it's so anyway, I'm totally off track here. But I think just
No,
wherever,
you were saying that you'd be
yeah,
surprised how
whatever,
many stories are crime
how many,
stories.
I'm wondering, first of all, how many, yeah, have those elements, as you were saying, of a really strong following trails of evidence. Even dramas, you're following a trail of evidence, honestly. It may not be that you're trying to solve a crime, that's different, but you're still following, like you said, you're following a trail of evidence that leads you to this catharsis, this ending, this thing that this protagonist, this hero is trying to find or figure out, or that he wants but he really needs, and like it's or she, and it's going to follow a certain path. So I'm getting totally off track here, but I love teaching crime writing because all of a sudden, like, writers' eyes go open and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I can apply this in like everything, this everything." Then there's the whole element of actual, like, if you are writing actually in the criminal world, or law detective, or law, legal, or police world, then there are many things you need to know, and there's lots of resources. There are tons of books out there where you can, if you need to know police code, you can find that. There's an amazing website, sorry, tracking board that I use called Crime Scene Writer 2 .io, and it's just a Google group. And within that group are all people like us, writers. And there's also professionals who work in the forensic or legal law enforcement, the FBI agents, police, etc. And you can pose any question and people will answer you almost instantly.
Okay,
Um,
so what I'm hearing is that you have put together, your assets, if you will, of primary places where you go to do your research.
mhm, tons of it. All on my website. I have links to almost everything there because I love it. I have a whole, like, just links that I've been saving. When I went through the Forensic Science Academy, in order to graduate, we had to do a project, like a thesis project. And so I wrote like a forensic manual for writers. And then, and I just did it, I was like, I'm going to take everything that I learned and put it in a nice, easy format so that when I need to know something, I can quick look it up. And then my writers group was like, no, we need that. You need to publish that. And I was like, no, that's not what I'm here to do. I'm not going to publish this. And they kept pressing me. And one writer in particular kept pressing me, and she sent me to MWP, MichaelWeeseyProductions.com, which I would bet of all you screenwriters, producers, etc. out there, you probably have one or more of their books on your bookshelf.
Mhm.
If you
Save
have
the
Save the
cat.
Cat, you
Yeah.
have that. That's my publishing company. So I queried them, and they sparked right away to the idea, and the result was this.
Which I just got. Yeah.
Forensic speak. So it's basically a forensic academy in a book. And it's for us. It's just, over 300 forensic terms. So the point is just learn how to speak forensics. Just start looking it up. You don't have to know everything, but you just want to, the things that that are specific to your script, you do want to get them right. So, but you don't have to be an expert. The information's out there.
Okay, so let me summarize what you're saying here. So first of all, you're saying if you're going to specifically in this particular field write crime type stuff, you've got to start putting together your list of assets. You've got to start putting together the places you can go to get the information so you can be as detailed as possible.
Mhm.
One place that people could go to get some shortcuts, you could help them out as they can go to your website. You
Mhm.
have links available, that sort of thing. But also, you've written a book called Forensic Speak, which
Mhm.
gives you dictionary definitions, basically, of forensic terms so that writers use them correctly because they're used incorrectly all the time.
Oh, yes.
And
Like,
so this makes you
yep.
feel like you know what you're talking about. Go ahead, give us some
No,
examples.
no, and it's
Use
fun. And it's fun because I put examples of TV shows and movies throughout the whole thing. So it really is like fun, but it's very factual and scientific, but it's also very fun. So it tells you, gives you the term and then what is it, where do I see it, and how can I use it? So it gives you writing tips along the way as
I
well.
love it. I love it. So
Yeah.
what are some that people get wrong, by the way?
Blood spatter versus spatter. Splatter with an L versus spatter without an L. There's a difference.
Are they both
Um,
possible or is one just completely incorrect?
the best way, one is kind of completely incorrect.
So
Spatter is
splatter isn't an actual thing.
but blood spatter is the correct term.
That's funny. Most people
So,
say blood splatter because it seems
which,
more true.
right, which a blood splatter with an L is really just the verb. When blood goes against a wall, it splatters. It's a verb, right? It's an action, right? But blood spatter is the actual patterning. Once the blood is on the wall, it's blood spatter. So it's like a noun, right? So this is
Right.
the blood spatter, and this is the pattern that the blood spatter makes.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay.
It's tricky.
Blood splatters, but in terms of forensics,
Mhm.
you're actually looking at the blood spatter pattern.
So blood splatters to make blood spatter.
I
It's
love
all
it.
faster. And it's a
I love
fun,
it. I love
yeah.
it. Okay. That's great.
So,
So you were talking about your dad early on. I want to go all the way back there. So I'm like, all these questions are coming up and I'm waiting like for the right time to ask them. But so your dad, I mean, you grew up in kind of a small town, right?
very
So I mean,
small.
it's not like this isn't like Murder She Wrote where there's a bunch of murders going on in your town, which
Yeah.
I always thought was crazy with Murder She Wrote. Like how many people are going to die
I was like,
in
maybe
this?
don't move to
Oh,
that
don't go
town.
there.
Don't
Yeah,
go there. Yeah,
really crazy. Bodies follow her. I've never seen one murder, let alone found one every time I go on vacation.
I know.
So the question is, what sorts of things did he ever have a foul play type situation? Did he ever discover some things where it was maybe potentially murder?
Yes, definitely. He would investigate about, on average, 105 deaths a year. So when you play that out, that's like almost one every, what, 3 or 4
3 or
days.
4 days.
But murders were very rare. Murders, very, very much more rare, but they definitely did happen. Suspicious deaths happened, of course. There were definitely times there, and there were a few cases that are still pending because of just, you know, lack of evidence or lack of body or but yes, there were those times. The one case in particular I ended up following for 25 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a cold case. It was a very it the girl and I we were the same age and she got very brutally murdered after our senior year of high school.
Ugh.
I did not know her, but we were, of the same age group. And that was a very shocking experience for our community because that sort of thing didn't really happen much.
Mhm.
So she was brutally raped and murdered.
Ugh.
And then the case was unsolved for almost 25 years. It has a wonderful, very redemptive ending. I don't know if wonderful, but it has a redemptive ending in that they finally were able to put together a cold case team in 2011. The state of Michigan did. And her case was the first case assigned to that team.
Mm.
And they worked relentlessly for about 4 years, going back over all the records and all this testimony because there was really no forensic evidence.
Mm.
Her body was found 3 months after she was killed. And so and it was outside, and there just wasn't much left, to be quite honest. And what was left was all inconclusive. So it was really a case of putting together circumstantial evidence, but they were able to kind of revisit everything, found a few new people, witnesses to start that had been keeping things a secret,
Yeah.
had come forward, and for their various reasons were ready to come forward, and they were able to take the case to trial and find these two brothers guilty, and now they are serving life in prison. So that was very interesting. I wrote a book on it because I sat through the whole trial. I'd been following this case with my family for so long, and my dad was pretty closed mouthed. He couldn't really say much about it because it was an open case. So I got to sit through the trial, and as I was sitting there, the whole idea for the story started to click into place. So
And is the story that you wrote, is it a true story or did you use fictional elements?
yeah, the story is fictionalized. I did not want to write the true story. Actually, a couple of TV documentaries had been done about it, and I didn't want to go that direction. So I fictionalized it, yeah. And it was published in 2020, and then I optioned it earlier this year to a company in the UK and wrote the pilot, and we were getting ready to go out and pitch it, and then the strike happened.
That's bummer. So tell me, what's the name of the book?
It's called Hole in the Woods.
So we have a link for this below, and I highly recommend that you check out this book. But also, since we've been talking about forensic speak, let's just do a quick plug. Jennifer has generously offered to let people from this community purchase forensic speak for 20% off. So you can click on that link also and get this book for 20% off the regular price. Thank you for that.
Yes.
That's wonderful.
Yes, please enjoy.
Well, that sounds like a really disturbing case, something
Yes.
that's with you for all those years. I mean, that's the thing. This stuff is gruesome.
Mhm.
And so you have to almost, if you're going to be writing in this particular genre, especially, you really have to kind of be able to separate, I think, the evidentiary part or the gruesome parts about the research from yourself, or else you could be all consumed by it. Have you struggled with that at
Yeah.
all?
No, I really don't. I kind of wonder if it's because of how I grew up.
Mm.
Because we had to compartmentalize a lot. We would be having a lot of this is pre-cell phone,
Sure.
which shows you that I'm as old as a dinosaur, but we'd be sitting at the kitchen table having a family dinner, and the phone would ring, the landline phone would ring, and it would be the county sheriff or the county detective saying, "Hey, we have an accident, or we have a suicide, or we have a suspicious death," or whatever. And my dad would have to get up from kitchen, from dinner and head on out.
So he would
So-
actually go to the scene and
Yeah.
examine the scene where the death occurred and look for evidence right there to be able to either support the hypothesis that, yeah, this is probably foul play, or, I think maybe there was a coronary heart attack or whatever.
Right, exactly. I mean, he worked very closely with the police and detectives because they were all investigating, and the medical examiner or the coroner is the only person allowed to touch the body. So they can't really do anything until that person gets there
Mm.
to examine the body, determine. They take different like they take a liver temperature, they do different things. They and examine the physical area of the body too. So before the body can actually be removed, there are things that have to be done that only the medical examiner or coroner can do. So they do come and do their own investigations as well. Yeah.
So in those, and this is important too, just story wise, I mean, as an aside almost, but whenever you have a cop or something who goes digging around the body, that's completely inappropriate and out of
Completely illegal.
completely illegal. So you should at least know that.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, I mean, it's not that your character couldn't do that, but you better know that they are really, really not.
I mean, yeah, you could do if you wanna put it in there as, like, an obstacle, like, oh, that something maybe they got tampered with before the medical examiner could get there, or it's a fun obstacle, but in real life, you'd be in big trouble.
I
And I
I I remember there's an episode of Bosch where one of the either Bosch or his partner or I can't even remember, but they find this body in the car and the way the body is, and even though they're waiting for the medical examiner, Bosch still moves her back because there's something underneath that he has to get.
oh,
And he gets in
naughty.
big trouble for it, but he did
Yeah,
it. He had to do it for whatever reason. I don't
because he's
remember.
Bosch, she has to do
Yeah,
it.
yeah, but they did acknowledge that, that was bad.
Okay.
He shouldn't have done that. Although in this case, he had to do it for whatever reason. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Like,
And, like, if people come to the scene or, if the first responders come to the scene and they're not sure if that person is dead or not, they're absolutely allowed to go and take vitals and find out
they have
if
to
they
find
should
out.
be yeah,
Mhm.
they have to find out. But once it's been declared dead, then back away.
And leave and then try to just not touch anything.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah, I love the shows too where, like, the detectives walk in and they're looking around the body and, like, they see, like, 5 things and already they've figured out, like,
Cause of death.
yeah, I was right, cause of death or whatever. I'm like, "It's TV."
Yeah. Willing suspension of disbelief, and we're fast forwarding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, so let's instead of talking about like using brutal murders and body stuff, there's other types of evidence. There's other types of crime things, right?
Yeah,
Besides just bodily harm. So,
exactly.
for example, let's say it's a money crime. Somebody is embezzling from somebody else. You
Mhm.
mentioned before that you have a class where you sort of teach, like, what is the evidentiary line? What is the process? Can you run us through what would be a normal process of
Yeah.
something like that?
For money laundering, you're saying? Or just
Sure. Well,
well,
that was the first thing that came to
yeah,
mind.
yeah, yeah.
He's embezzling or something.
Right. I mean, the processes are similar for no matter what crime. They just take a different form, I guess you would say. So, like, crimes, like white collar crimes, like, let's say laundering or embezzlement or whatever, a lot of that stuff is now what you would do is you'd be looking at evidence digitally. So there's a huge new field of forensics, digital forensics,
Mhm.
electronic forensics, where you're looking at files on people's accounts and servers and where things are generated electronically or digitally or in the cloud or social media accounts. There's a whole, I mean, there's, what do they call it? It's called OSINT, I think. So if you're one who doesn't like a lot of squeamish, blood and guts, this is great because you're really tracking people's history, their digital history. So like,
So, for example, oh, this gal went missing on this particular date. The last post she made was at the bar with her friend Cindy. They have a selfie right there. And then also then there is the last time she used her card was an hour later at another place down the street. And the last time we see her in her car, we have the car camera that caught her car driving, but she didn't seem to be driving, but we don't know who's in the driver's seat.
right.
Something like that.
Exactly, and then so and so's Ring doorbell caught them at 5:55 doing this, and so yes, you're tracking all this digital evidence. So you're
To try to piece together what
Mhm.
could have happened.
Right, because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do I always create a case file when I'm making a new story, and if it's centered around a case, I create my own case file as if I'm the detective, right? And I'm like, okay, how do I want to figure this out? What are the things that are going to be in my file? And one of the things I found really helpful is looking at what you're describing is victimology. So looking at the victims last 24 or 48 hours, who they were with, where they were, what did they do? what was their mindset? Just like the million, did they have hobbies? Where did they live? The millions of things that go into like what humans do on a daily basis. And so when
Mm.
you start, I love looking at a crime from that angle first, before my killer or my criminal, because you can start to really build a case based on what the victim was doing and how that person put themselves in the path of a criminal.
Mm.
And not saying that it's intentional, but there has to be motive, opportunity, and means. So there has to be a point of opportunity at which the criminal and the victim's paths
Well,
are crossing.
intersect. Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so classic cliche, but it happens a lot, right? Is the boyfriend or the husband. So where were the two of them within a 24-hour period? Where was the last time they saw each other? What what did their relationship look like? Who
Because most murders are crimes of passion in that regard, right? Like,
right.
not, I mean, maybe not passion, but they're
But
most murders are committed by somebody who
people
knows.
that yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Which is
exactly.
crazy,
It's
right?
crazy. I know. It's crazy. And anyway, I could go on and on, but the organization that I support, the Cold Case Foundation, they are a wealth of resource too, and they have actual, like, courses on their website and information on their website about victimology, and also they really teach, like, how not to become a victim, like, how to reduce your chances of becoming a victim, and so, I don't know, that's kind of open in the last couple of years. I didn't used to think that way in terms of story, but in the last couple of years, I've sort of shifted because I think it's very interesting, but I don't let me back up and say, I don't think there's always enough attention on the victim. I think it's just like we say, "Oh, the victim is this very stock character," right?
Mm.
And it sort of gets pushed into a tiny little box.
You know,
And
that's
then
one thing I liked about
mm,
the show Without a Trace.
I did not see. Okay.
So, they did this interesting, it's funny you're saying this. Without a Trace, you usually start any kind of show with,
Mhm,
okay, you've got the dead body, whatever, and now they're trying to track down the crime.
mhm.
But you never really get to know the body's just the body. You don't get to
Right,
know the character. But
right.
every time he would go into a new situation to try to get information, he'd always have these sort of fantasy elements where he would then imagine it and we would see the
Mhm,
victim interacting with the people like the night before and he would be kind of watching what she's doing and then she would fade away or whatever the case may be. Or if he went
right.
to the home of the person and he was able to get into the room to like look for her diary, whatever, at some point he would like sit on the bed and then he would imagine her what she did in that room. It really
Oh, I
made
love
you
that.
feel
Yeah.
connected to the person. Now you care
Yeah,
about the victim. She's not just the
exactly.
body.
Right. And exactly. And story-wise, it's interesting because you're starting to solve the crime based on that victim's the things that that person did or paid attention to or didn't do, or because the theory behind I don't how do I say this? The theory behind victimology is that I don't want to say I don't want to say this in like a blaming way because the victim is never ever 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 to blame. um but the things that they do are interesting to study because it leads you to who did it.
Yeah. And I get
Yeah.
that. I mean, say for example, okay, me. I'm I'm very outspoken. I'm not very, how do I say this? I'm not very like submissive or very, demure in some cases. So if I were out and, going to some event and somebody was, being a jerk, I might actually get in their face and say, "Hey,
Right.
this is unacceptable," which
Right.
could then lead to me being dead in the alley the next day.
Right.
So
But
it's still not my
exactly.
fault.
No, it's not your fault. But then the people around you, when the cops would start to, oh, yeah, I remember she kind of had a little incident with that person. And here's when it happened. And here's who that person was.
Right.
Here's what the conversation was. And here's what they looked like. And so It's
And yeah, and in some ways you
yeah,
could say, okay, maybe if I hadn't have done that, I would have kept my mouth shut, then maybe I wouldn't be dead now in an alley. On the other hand, it's a personality thing. You
yeah,
sometimes you can't help who you are, and sometimes people need to be told to stop
be
being jerks.
quiet.
And darn it, I'll do it. You know what I'm saying?
That's
So
why I
I
love
get it.
you.
Yeah, right.
That's why
So one of the things I'm often trying to drill home with a lot of my clients is that, and actually we kind of briefly talked about this when I saw you recently in LA.
Mhm.
So my approach to story structure is always through the character.
Mm,
And I believe in the classic 3-act structure. I think it's just ingrained in the fabric of the universe. Nevertheless, I'm approaching it through the character and the character choices that are being made to pursue a goal. So even if I'm not writing a crime story, I
mhm.
see it as all having the same overall structure because ultimately there's something that my character wants. There's something they are pursuing, and therefore they have to take logical
Yep,
steps to get it.
yep,
And so the same applies for if the thing that they want is to solve the crime and bring the bad guys to justice, that just happens to be the thing that they want. But
exactly.
in terms of the logic, can you talk to me about that? Because I find that a lot of people skip steps. They
Mhm,
yeah, or they assume too much. Like they assume
yeah,
too much on the behalf of the like they're not like leading the audience there, or they under or they're condescending, like, okay, we get that. We get that. We don't need that. It's just hard to find the right balance sometimes. So
yeah.
can you talk to me about that? And do you agree with that?
I agree because when I start to beat out my first, I have an idea. Let's see if there's a story here. I take my hero, my character, my main character, my protagonist, and I do the same thing. I start to figure out that character's journey. It doesn't matter what kind of story, if it's a crime story or a drama or a romance or whatever, that that
That
hero,
structure. That
yeah, that
yeah.
structure of taking that main character through a journey is the same in the crime story. In fact, I think it might be a little harder because you have two journeys that you're taking that protagonist on. And so you have two ways you have to think about through character arc. So you first of all you have the main plot of like protagonist wants to figure out crime. So that's easy, right? It's the same all the time. Hero needs to solve crime. The end. That's great. It's cemented. How they do that, well, it changes everything. But that's always going to be your protagonist's journey is to figure out the crimes, find justice, solve the case, blah, blah, blah. But the second layer, the second journey, which is just as important, is that emotional journey.
Which
It's
is
like
more important.
more important sometimes. And I think it's what makes crime stories deeper than just like they were in the past, where it was just like, we're just going to solve the crime and it's awesome. But we don't care. And no, there's no emotion to it hardly. Now, as audience, we need more. We want to know why, and we want to follow this protagonist. Why are they so bent on solving this particular case? Why is it so important to them? How is it going to change them? How's it going to make them different or bring up like skeletons from the past or and how are they going to deal with that? And
Mhm.
so when you're writing a crime story, you really have to think through both these parallel arcs of this character. Yep.
Well, I just finished an article yesterday that is entitled "The Backbone of Story Structure is the Character Arc." And
Interesting.
and what I did was I went through what does that mean, because of course, as we know, every story is a personal paradox.
Mhm.
And there's really nothing new under the sun. If you're writing a romantic comedy, then it's the same formula. Boy gets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl. And so what
Mhm.
you have to do is you have to figure out what's at stake for them personally,
Mhm.
what's driving them personally. And so that's where the need comes in. We know what they want. The want
Exactly.
is usually the easy thing. It's
Yeah.
the need. It's the need. What is driving them? So I was basically arguing that the want drives the action of the story, but the
Mhm.
need fuels it.
Okay. Yeah. I like that.
And that's the two parallel things, right?
Yeah.
One is the straight plot. I'm pursuing this goal. Will I get it? But the real arc is how the character changes
Yes.
over the course of the story and how that particular path that they're on challenges them personally in their deepest, darkest spheres.
Exactly. Exactly. And exactly. And that's why with that hole in the woods story that I was telling you about based on true crime, that's why I wanted to write that as fiction. Because what I did was, okay, so I had one protagonist, she's female because I write female protagonists, and she's on a cold case team and she gets called up to solve this case. So obviously that's her want, right? She's and it's not a whodunit because everybody in the town kind of knows who done it, but they haven't been able to nail them. So it's her
Hmm.
job to get up there, sort through, urban legend and figure out what actually happened so that she can get the evidence to nail them. Great, great, exciting. And you got to make that exciting, intense, and suspenseful. That alone is enough challenge. But then I was like, but why is this going to be a struggle for her? Why is this particular case? Because it's interesting with detective fiction, right? That's your job. Okay, so what's the motive? But what's, of course, yeah, that's your job. The motivation is that's your job. Okay, but what's behind that? So I made this character, this kind of newer cold case detective. She has a really hard past, and she has a lot of PTSD from trauma that happened to her when she was younger, and it's really she has never been able to deal with it, and just keeps stuffing and stuffing and stuffing away. And so as she's going through this case, it starts to pull up all this stuff that she thought she had stuffed away. And because she's been stuffing it away, she's become a person who's very insular and doesn't let people in. And she doesn't have friends. She doesn't have a boyfriend. She can't even take care of a plant. Like her plants are, she has no pets. She has no family. She's lost her family. So as we see her go through this case and these demons start to come up and grab a hold of her, there are a couple people in the story that she meets who are a former detective and current detective who start to speak into her life. Also, the victim is kind of a supernatural thing, starts to speak into her life. But at the end, you see that she's opened the door a little for trust.
Hmm.
And there's that sort of cathartic redemption. Oh, it's a small redemption for her. She's not like now she has
Not
everything.
like, oh, I'm
Yeah,
so trusting now.
but you can see that she's broken through a lot of it, and
She's on a trajectory.
she's on a trajectory to trust. Anyway, I don't know why I brought that up, but I guess because it's just an example of
The need.
yeah,
What's
the
really,
need,
because that's the tricky thing, right? Like,
right?
you have to give it a need that is unique to that character. I love Bosch for this reason. I mean, they've really done a great
Mhm.
job with Bosch of creating this backstory with him where he is a relentless man. It's like he will not play ball because the truth has to out. And it keeps shooting him in the foot. He
Mhm.
can't advance. He can't get promotion because everybody is like, oh, Bosch. They get so mad at him, but he's a dog with a bone. He will
Right,
not let go because he cares about the person that's been thrown away because of his own mother, who was a prostitute and who was
mhm,
killed. I mean,
right.
very, very powerful stuff. It makes it very personal for him.
Mhm.
So he's not just doing a job. He's
Right.
invested in something that goes bigger than him.
Exactly, exactly. And that's the key to finding, when you're doing, well,
In
any
any
story,
story.
any story. Um,
Yes, I agree.
but I think it's especially, you got to watch out with crime stories because a lot of times we fall into that, like, oh, well, it's an FBI agent or a medical examiner or detective, and well, that's just their job. Okay, but why are they doing that job? And like peeling back the layers of, like you said, but why? Like, why is Bosch a detective? Well,
We
because
justify it with Bosch, but we've
yeah.
got to justify it with somebody else. So I want to ask you about the female aspect of all this too. But I will do that when we come back because I told you that we were going to do 2 episodes because I have so much that I want to ask you. So, right now, I just want to say for everybody watching this, go to the links in the notes section, buy the book. If you're writing anything forensic related, you really do need it. I love it. I love it, by the way. I
Yeah.
really did. I flipped through it. I was like, oh, this is really good. Good for her. And so I was really, really encouraged by that. And it's so simple. I'm surprised somebody didn't do it before. It's
I
really,
It's a
it's,
simple concept, yeah.
it is. It's such a great
And,
idea.
like, I've had there are police academies and, like, criminalistics departments who use this book. I just I'm like, "What?"
Wow. Because
Okay.
nobody's ever written the manual with like a dictionary glossary of
Right.
all the terms and then how to use it. I mean, it's very, very helpful. So buy the book, 20% off for listeners. And then also, she's got some other books if you're interested in the work that she does. The Coroner's Daughter is
Yeah.
really great. And I know
This
that was,
one's
go
this is
ahead.
3 that's coming out October 24th.
It looks great.
They did such a nice job. Yeah, there'll be at least 2 more, and then we'll see.
See, that's exciting. Good for you. Okay. So I just want to encourage everybody to do that. And you also gave us some of your personal information in case anybody had any specific questions for you, which is incredibly generous that you're allowing people to access you. And go ahead.
Yeah, and if you, go onto the website, there's an opportunity for you to get a free forensic book, which also signs you up for my newsletter, and I only send it out once a month because, frankly, I'm busy. And
I
who
know.
wants tons in there? Nobody wants tons in their inbox. But I always put, news and things that are happening, but also there's always new forensic information in there and resources and yeah,
Awesome.
lots of goodies.
All right. So check out the notes section. You can see all those things. And thank you, Jennifer, for your incredible knowledge, for your expertise, and for your willingness to come on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Everybody, happy writing.
Thank you for listening to The Storyteller's Mission with Zena Del Lowe and Jennifer. May you go forth inspired to change the world for the better through story.